What's up, Sammie?
What's up, Tae? What's good?
Nothing much. We're actually recording in the morning for once instead of the middle of the night.
Isn't this crazy? There's light outside.
Well, speaking of light, today we were thinking of shedding some light on trans rep in media. After we put you on blast for the WLW episode, I guess it's my turn. I know we've both seen Pose. How long ago did you watch that show? Because for me, it was like 2 years ago, maybe. And then I never finished it because I got too, traumatized from how sad it was.
I watched it, I think, the year that the final season came out. I started watching it.
Okay.
So I got, a decent way through the first season. And then I agree. I also thought it was really sad.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important piece of media to, exist in the world. And it's also very interesting to see such, pivotal queer history moments. One of the Catholic bishops, I want to say, or something like that, was against sex education and the use of condoms. The activists, they all went to that church and laid down in the middle of the service, basically to simulate being dead, and they had to be carried off in stretchers as a protest against this is what happens when you don't teach kids sex ed, because people are literally dying because of it. And they showed that in the show, which was kind of crazy.
Damn. I didn't even know about that one. We didn't learn that in my queer history class.
A lot of it's based on Paris is Burning, which you said you saw a little bit about that, right?
I think I watched it at some point, in school.
Yeah, I think I also saw it in class, because Paris is Burning is obviously a very important work of queer documentation. It was done by a lesbian, but it was done by a lesbian middle class white woman, I believe. But she never paid the drag queens and the trans femmes who were the subjects of the film. Have you seen the documentary Disclosure?
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it was Laverne Cox maybe that said this, but they were talking about how the inverse relationship between the amount of trans people being depicted in media from the early and the mid 2010s, and then also the skyrocketing amount of anti-trans legislation that's happening at the same time. And it's visibility is not really contributing to the advancement of trans rights in the US and stuff like that. And so I feel that Pose is part of that broader conversation where it's yes, we're depicting the violence that trans women experience and things like that, but is that kind of going into the realm of trauma porn? And then is that being offset by happier, more mundane depictions of trans people in media? But I do think Pose is a good show.
And you mean are those stories only being used to discover a new monetary audience instead of actually being used to support and uplift the trans community?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of the question. And I don't have a clear answer on it, especially because obviously I'm not a Black or brown trans woman. But yeah, I do think it is a question of where's the line of you're depicting these people's lives, but then what are you actually giving back to them? Mm-hmm. You just finished The Owl House, right?
Yeah. There's Raine. I think they're the only trans, canonically trans character in the show.
I believe that's also true. But they're cool, and I feel that was pretty normal. They were just a normal, cool character that just happened to be trans.
They were just there. Well, they weren't just there. They're actually integral to the story
exactly.
Also. And had a complex but also rewarding romantic relationship arc and personal. Well, did they have a personal relationship arc? They had a challenge for sure when they were under control of by the emperor and the evil plant lady. But yeah, they're a really powerful character who honestly such a great well-written character just in general. A lot of emotional depth and clear motivation, complexity, especially when they were playing double agent for a while.
That was fun. Yeah.
Well, am I spoiling the show now? Maybe.
I mean, it's okay. I think people don't click off, I guess, if you don't want Owl House spoilers.
Yeah, but that was really cool to see. I had not heard of Raine before I saw the show. And then I was like, and Raine and Ida are so cute together.
No, they're
too.
so cute.
Oh, cute couple.
I think that was honestly one of the things I appreciated most about their character, besides them just being like, cool and well written, was actually their romance with Ida, because I think that's something I've never really seen before in like a mainstream like piece of media, where it's like a non-binary like L like W and BLW relationship.
I see.
Between like two middle-aged characters as well, which is like very fun to see.
The middle-aged part is crazy.
I know. And then also like Ida's whole owl lady thing is like an analogy, like a lot of people see it as an analogy for disability and stuff. So it's like you have a lot of like cool factors like being represented there about people's lives, but they're still like given that space to like find love later in life. And I think that was really sweet.
Yeah. And that even like added that Ida is a furry, but that's less relevant, I guess.
But also important to me personally.
Slay for furries.
Furryism.
I also loved them meeting as kids. First, they dropped the lore about them dating in college, Ida and Raine, and how like Ida was like keeping the secret of her curse, and then Raine was like, I can't take this anymore, and broke up with her. I was like, OT, like, because it's a kid's show, right? And you're seeing like, I mean, not that that's like inappropriate or anything. I feel like that's just like kind of it's a heavier topic of like middle-aged people having like a serious relationship in like their young adulthood, breaking up and coming back together. Like that's tea. I love to see that in a show. And I feel like, I mean, when I watch kids' cartoons, I don't usually get like good shit like that.
No, I agree with you. I think it's cool to see, because honestly, something that sometimes bothers me about children's media is, obviously we're not the target audience because we're not children, but it's the way that like all the characters get paired off, and then you're kind of just expected to like you're led to believe that all of those characters remain together in the like romantic relationships they started in like high school essentially. And that's obviously like you don't want your favorite like characters to break up. Too. Exactly, but I personally like don't like it as much because it feels pretty unrealistic, because it's a very small subset of like people that stay with the same person that they've been with romantically since like high school and things like that. So I did actually like the fact that I also agree. It was cool to see that they were together and then they had to like step apart from each other and meet again at a different part of their life. Like right person, wrong time is like a cool thing to see.
Well, I think it's just always great to see more complexity in general, because I feel like what you were describing about kids' cartoons is just like they're kind of like puritanical, very binary in more ways than one culture, where it's like you meet someone and you're together for the rest of your lives. Whereas like in Ida and Raine's story, they have complexity because they're not together. They're like both living their own lives individually, and then they get back together. And also like Raine, obviously with like their own gender, like they are non-binary as well. So there's like a lot of anti-traditional puritanical things going on, and that was really great to see in a kids show, because you're right, like we don't usually see that. They're usually trying to in some way or another like promote that kind of like, this is your soulmate, you're together forever, and also you're straight and binary,
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think it's good to see.
In a similar vein, well, okay, I mean, it's kind of, I feel like it might be cheating to talk about good kids cartoons, start with the Owl House, and then use Gravity Falls as a separate example, because Gravity Falls and the Owl House, like they're very different shows, but they have like similar creative teams, and like people from both projects were working on them. And I feel like a lot of people who are fans of one are also fans of the other. This is a side note. I'm so gonna get canceled for this, but like I've been rewatching Gravity Falls, and like it's like a product of its time.
It really is. There's like definitely racism.
There was racism. I was like, whoa. But it was like from like what? Like 2016?
Something like that.
2017? And it was like, wow, like that would not fly
No, definitely not.
And I don't flag anything in the Owl House. Maybe in like 5 years I will, but I don't have like the sensors to flag anything in the Owl House. But I totally do in Gravity Falls, and I was like, whoa! And then it like reminds you that like most of the main cast is white, and then I don't know. That was a jump scare because I didn't remember that at all.
Yeah, easy to block out, I guess.
Even though I watched it for the first time. Well, I guess it was a few years ago. Off topic, maybe we'll get into it another time. Don't cancel us. Just like next time you watch Gravity Falls, just...
It's not cancelable. It's like literally racist. Like the Asian girl, like her depiction is literally racist. I don't remember it exactly, but I remember being like, damn, that was racist.
I mean, it was like, she was like a severe, like, fob stereotype.
Yeah, okay, that was probably it then.
That was the problem with her. Yeah. Anyway, what I was going to say about Gravity Falls is that, like, I didn't know this before, but recently as I've been, like, going into the fandom more, I see a lot of people headcanoning Dipper as trans. I definitely do see that. I saw this compilation that was like all the evidence that Dipper is trans. And after I watched that video, I was like, yeah, I buy it.
Yeah, and I think that's like an interesting broader phenomenon because, you know, obviously I feel like I'm gonna get more of like the trans content in fandom spaces, but it's a very common trend in media for like scrawny like white boys who oftentimes for some reason have brown hair, not always, are headcanon as trans. I'm thinking about like Dipper, Peter Parker. I'm sure there's like many more, but I just can't name them off the top of my head. But personally, I'm not a fan.
You're not a fan? Expand on that.
Yeah, I think, like, obviously I respect people's right to, like, headcanon who they want as trans, and I think that's great if, like, you know, there's some trans guys who are seeing themselves in those characters, but I do think it's a problem when that's the prevailing and oftentimes only trans headcanon in a fandom space, because it's often these guys where their, like, masculinity is always called into question, and it's never just, like, why not, like, Grunkle Stan, you know? Like, why can't he be the one who's trans? It's always someone whose masculinity is called into question, usually because he's a nerd, or he's, like, a little scrawny or something like that. Like, he fails the standard of masculinity in some way. And I think that's, like, understandable why people would relate to that, because, you know, like, as a trans guy, you're often, like, your masculinity is often called into question. But I do think we're falling into, like, a weird trap when that's the only type of character that's headcanon as trans, or predominantly headcanon as trans, because it kind of feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy where it's like, oh, you don't think that trans men can ever be just, like, a guy, and then that's not called into question. And I feel like that's, like, negative messaging towards, like, younger trans guys especially, and, like, personally it makes me feel kind of bad, because I'm like, well, you only think that, like, the scrawny, like, guy who, yeah, like, fails to live up to the standard of masculinity is the one who's trans. We are moving away from it a little, though, because I have seen trans Grunkle Stan content. I think that's pretty iconic.
That's so iconic. I also kind of feel like a way to combat that would be to have more, like, canonically trans masked characters who don't fit that archetype, because these are, like, fans making headcanons. And so they're gonna headcanon, like, what is most relatable to them, I guess. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think it's like we're going to be oftentimes disappointed when we're counting on, like, fandoms to provide representation via headcanons.
Yeah, I think it's just sad to me because I'm like, it's literally like fanon, you know? Like, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to be, like, confined by the same things. I would say, like, speaking of what you said, though, is, like, we just need more canonical trans rep. I 100% agree with you. Because I would say, like, a character that actually... Well, he's not really, like, the same, I guess, because he's not, like, scrawny and stuff. But the main protagonist of Dead End Paranormal Park is a trans guy, canonically, and it is covered in the show. And I feel like he was, like, a really cool character, where it was like, yeah, he's trans. It's important to his character, not the only thing about his character. But he is, like, allowed to have, like, his insecurities and, like, things like that. But it does feel a lot better because he's canonically trans in the text. And he's also given a love interest, which is very fun.
Aww.
Yeah.
Is it the Asian girl that he's with?
No, he's actually he does get with an Asian guy though. His friend
Oh, Slay.
is an Asian girl, but I don't know. She never got a love interest, I think, before the show got canceled, unfortunately.
Oh.
People did like to ship her with her friend, who I don't remember her name, but she was like a hijabi girl, and they were really cute together, like their dynamic. But it wasn't canon.
That's cute. Oh. Bummer.
You haven't seen I Saw the TV Glow, have you?
No.
Okay.
Should I?
You should watch it. I feel like that'd
Was
be
that good?
interesting to cover.
I did want to watch that, yeah.
Yeah, it was a good movie, and I think that's kind of where I'm like landed at with a lot of like trans rep these days, because you talked about a lot in our WLW episode that you don't resonate with a lot of the WLW media that's out, or it feels like it's not speaking specifically to your experience. And I would say there's definitely like good trans stuff out there, and there's more coming into like the media where it's like, yeah, I enjoyed Dead End, and well, okay, I don't really remember Sex Education enough to speak on that, but there's, shows like Sex Education and Heartstopper that have like not leading, but like major trans characters that discuss issues of transness. And then there's shows like, or there's movies like I Saw the TV Glow that are explicitly about, well, maybe not explicitly, but like pretty obviously about the trans experience, and are very like nuanced and well done. Or like Cowboys, that was another one. It's like a coming of age film about a little like trans boy whose mother is very transphobic, and then his dad, who's been in and out of prison for like drug abuse, has like takes his son away so he can like, live as his true self. But then like everyone, like the government and stuff, are like against them because he's like, this man is a criminal, but like the father is actually the one who wants the best for his son, and is like the only one who's like pushing for that. And like that was a good film and stuff, but I would say like none of them are very like resonant with me. And even I Saw the TV Glow, which is about like what happens when you don't transition, and how that can like make you feel like you're living in like a different reality, like a fake reality, because like you're not living as like your true self, and like what that does to a person. And those are like both good films, and like technically I would say like they cover things that are like relatable to trans people. But yeah, I just don't feel like any of them really hit for me.
Is there anything that has hit for you recently?
Not recently. I remember thinking like searching. Okay, I was telling you this before we got on air, but like One Last Stop, I like that trans guy character in that book. I think he said his name was Nico.
Oh, Nico, yeah.
Yeah, he was really cool because I liked the fact that he was just like happened to be incidentally trans, but he was like a really cool guy. Like he had a bunch of like cool tattoos, and like he did like witchcraft or whatever.
Yeah, he was a psychic.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, that's swag. And he was just like a dependable guy that his like friends like went to for advice, and it was just like he was incidentally trans. And I wouldn't say he was relatable, but that was one of the first times where I was like, oh, I like this. Like he's like a guy that I would want to be like. And he was also not white, which was also really cool. So
yeah, he was not white. He had an awesome girlfriend.
That was also slay.
He himself was slay. She was slay. Yeah, One Last Stop is a great one for queer joy.
I
LGBT
agree.
plus joy.
And it still addresses like the historical context of well, like what we had to do a little bit at least to get there because of God, what's her name? The main love interest.
Jane.
Thank you. I feel like it addresses.
I have it right next to me.
Oh, slay. Yeah, I feel like with Jane, it's really cool because she's from that time period where the queer rights movement was really like gaining momentum. She's able to like give a window into like what we had to do to fight to get to the point where we are now. Not obviously, I'm not saying like it's a progress narrative because that's false, but it's important to like think about the roots of like the terminology of queerness and like things like that. So I feel like that book was good because it addressed like both sides of like, yes, there was struggle, but also there's joy.
Yeah, I remember, well, it was a little bit disappointing that this was kind of like throwaway. We didn't actually get the conversation in the novel. I remember towards the end when Jane is like freed from, the situation in the book, she and Nico have a discussion because Jane is a butch lesbian. Like, and we've talked on here before about how like the lines of like gender identification, especially in the sapphic community back in the day, and like butch lesbianism were a little bit blurred with like butch and like trans maskness. Jane and Nico have a conversation about that, and about like the different terminology and like things in a modern context sort of stuff. And I thought that was really, really cool. Unfortunately, they don't get into it that much. And I wish they did. But maybe Casey McQuiston didn't feel super comfortable going into that too deeply. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah, that's coming back to me now that you said that. I like had forgotten about that. But that is really cool that they at least touched on that topic. Because actually, yeah, now that you said that, the trans quote like representation, I would say, that's resonated with me most deeply have actually not been like shows and movies, because I can't think of one off the top of my head where I was like, yeah, that's me. Because also there's barely any like Asian trans rep. Like I'm just thinking about like probably the only ones I can think of in like movies and like TV shows is like whatever characters like Chella Man's out here playing, because he's like an Asian trans actor. And that's really cool, but I haven't actually seen any of his, like, filmography. What's resonated with me was actually Stone Butch Blues by Leslie Feinberg and The Year of Blue Water by Yanyi. Because Stone Butch Blues, even though it's about a butch lesbian, and I don't identify that way, the main character, she is... I don't know if she's explicitly calls herself transmasc, but she goes on testosterone, and... she presents in a very like masculine manner, and she doesn't feel entirely like a woman, but the way that is handled was so real, and it kind of goes into the experience of like when she transitioned and she took tea, and then she started to be perceived as like a man in day-to-day society. She had felt like she had felt her body had like betrayed her, essentially, like when she went through female puberty, and that she wanted to like take testosterone to like feel better about herself. But she said she felt like she faded into like obscurity almost when she transitioned physically and was being perceived societally as a man, because she was like, that's not the full nuance of who I am as a person. And it felt so lonely. And like the book really dives into like her emotional interiority about how it's like this trade-off between like, this is what I wanted like for my body, and then like this is also wrong because people aren't seeing me for who I am because of like these boxes that we put people in based on like their physical like bodies and things like that. And she eventually goes off tea and kind of occupies this space of like androgyny, where it's like people weren't able to initially tell like, is she a man or a woman? And like that was kind of like more accurate to her, but also very dangerous for her, because gender nonconformity was something that like put you under physical threat. And I felt like that was really resonant about like this feeling that like I feel like myself and a lot of other trans men experience, is like kind of being in sort of like ostracized or like sequestered away from the rest of the queer community when we present just more like just like a quote like normal cis guy kind of vibe, because it's like, oh, you aren't queer enough because masculinity isn't seen as something that's queer, because queerness is usually coded as like visible femininity. So it's like, oh, are you even really queer if you're just trying to be normal, when it's like, no, I'm still queer, I just don't maybe look like your version of queer.
Yeah, that's like really hypocritical also, because that's like the point of queerness is freedom
Facts.
of expression and like diversity of expression and identity. So, well, you're real and you're valid.
Thank you.
Not that you need to hear it, but
no, I appreciate it. But yeah, no, I think that was really cool to see, because like it's not just like the loneliness either in Stone Butch Blues, because at the end of the book, she actually enters into a very emotionally like intimate and I would say romantic relationship with a trans woman. And it was so sweet and like so cute, and also very like heartwarming, but also like heartbreaking as well, because obviously they face a lot of violence, and there's this question of like, if there are one of us together, like we can kind of slide under the radar, but like if there's two of us together, like visibly gender non-conforming, we become like a target. And it's like, how do you find community when it's like you're endangering the people you love, and then also like seeing your own pain like reflected in another trans person of like having to move through the world in that difficult way. But then also like when you open yourself up to it, that's like one of the greatest like forms of intimacy, and like that was very explored. And then at the end it kind of ends with this image of the main character, I believe their name's Jess, and she's sitting in like a circle of like trans people who are like gender nonconforming people, and all of them, she's like, we all didn't like fit into society's idea of like what a man or woman should be, because that's not who we were. But it's like I looked into their faces and I knew how hard fought that like beauty was. And so like that I finally have found my people. And it's just like so good, because it's like, even though it's so traumatic, it like ends on that note of like,
Yeah.
we are each other's like we are mirrors of each other, and like accepting you all is like kind of accepting myself. And I just like, it was so good. Like that was life changing when I first read that book. You should
Wow.
read it.
Is it an autobiography?
It's a novel, but it's heavily autobiographical. It's kind of like, you know, Ocean Vuong's like On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous or something like that, where it's like
Right.
heavily based on the author's life, but it's technically fictionalized.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I will read it. I've been meaning to read it for a while. I think like that is a lot of what trans and queer media lacks, like in TV and movies and stuff. Either it's just like totally trauma porn, tragic ending, like just horribly bleak, or there's like, it might be bleak, but then there's like some happy solution at the end. You know, it lets you leave the theater feeling good. Like, lets cis people leave the theater feeling like good about themselves and being like, oh, yay, like transphobia has been solved, and like I contributed by watching this movie or whatever. And it's kind of lacking that nuance in between, where it's like the world is still fucked up and there's still transphobia, but there, like, you can also find some light in it, even if everything isn't totally fixed. So yeah, I'm glad that that book exists to have that.
Yeah, no, I think you're so right. And then also, like, you saying that is making me really think the other thing that's missing from like trans media is like trans community. And like Pose has a little of that. I would say Sex Education tried to have that with having multiple trans characters, but nothing's quite hit like Stone Butch Blues. I think maybe because we are allowed into a lot more of the protagonist's interiority through like the book format, because you get to hear her thoughts, but it's not really as easy to do maybe in like movies and TV shows, because we're just kind of like watching their lives like play out. And even if we are close to them in emotional moments, we're not quite as close as you can get in a book.
Can you talk about a little bit about the other book you mentioned?
Yeah, for sure.
Is it Blue Water?
The Year of Blue Water, yes, by Yanyi. It's actually a poetry collection, so it's not like a novel or anything like that. But that is my favorite poetry collection. I'm not a huge poetry person, for context, so. But it's a prose poetry collection, so it's essentially like, it feels, and I think he actually did write it in like his notes app over like a year or two or something like that. So It's just like little paragraphs of like observations about his life. It really went into like the nuances of like being a trans person, and like very like resonant like statements about being trans without falling into the same like the common like narratives where it's like, you know, every short film about transness from like 10 years ago or like within the last 10 years is like some trans guy like using ace bandages to like bind in the mirror, and he's like, I could never pass, and then he like puts on like 5 hoodies. That's like the meme, you know, where it's like, okay, yeah, like obviously trans people have dysphoria, but it's kind of something that's not really given depth or like nuance. But there's this one like poem where in Yanyi's collection where it's literally just like, there are places I can't go, like outside my body. Or there's another one where he's like, I didn't hate my body, I just didn't feel anything about it at all because it was never like my own, like that kind of sentiment, where I feel like that's the kind of nuance that we're missing from a lot of like trans media, which I do think I Saw the TV Glow does sort of get into, but it's just like we don't have enough of it yet. And then also I would like to see some things that are like more resonant to me, specific like Asian transness, and maybe not only centered around like dysphoria and like the struggle of trying to transition and stuff, because like I know that's right. I experience that in my daily life. So maybe we can like have some different things. And I think that will just come with having more trans rep.
Right. So like stuff that expands more on like the additional layers that come with it, besides just like what everyone assumes that it would be, the transness would be.
Yes, I think we need more
Yeah.
media that goes into the complexities of like dysphoria and like that kind of thing. Like I think that would be good, but then also we need some that kind of turn almost completely away from that and explore like other aspects of transness. Like it'd be cool to see more stuff like, you know, first relationships, like, oh, you've transitioned, but maybe like, you know, queer time, the concept of queer time where it's like we don't
Yeah, yeah.
run on the same timelines as like cishet
Right. We
people.
need to do an episode about that.
We should.
I
It
don't
would be
think
good.
we've explained that well. But yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that would be cool to see like, you know, a trans person who maybe has like transitioned and things like that, but they haven't been able to experience like romance or sex on the same timeline as like maybe their cishet peers, which is fine, but it's kind of like what would that look like, the exploration of like first relationships and that kind of thing, like maybe when you're 30 and you haven't had a chance to experience that because you had to like go through puberty again. And I think that kind of stuff would be
Right.
cool and like also funny and like endearing to see. And it would feel like more resonant maybe where it doesn't have to be so depressing. Like obviously it can have moments of like
Yeah.
emotional like heaviness, but it could also be like framed as kind of like funny and like awkward, but also like important and like intimate.
Yeah, I think the place that we are right now with trans media in the culture is like it kind of, I think you mentioned this either earlier or off air, but it kind of parallels with like how gay men and their stories came into the media, where it's like right now we're kind of at this stage where it doesn't really seem like trans media is for trans people, and it's kind of like we're in like the Love Simon era, maybe, you know, trans media for straight people or for cis people that's like meant to, I guess, educate them, and it seems that's the vibe it's giving, since it's lacking that nuance that like you would have to have a baseline understanding of like a trans experience to understand further.
Yeah, and I think it's also just like the single story issue, which that's a great lecture if you guys want to watch that, the single story. I think it's by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I might have butchered her name, so sorry, but that's a great lecture about why we need like more representation always, because I do think that like the stories that are out right now, they are resonating with some trans people, but it's just not resonating with all trans people. And I'm thinking about Philosophy Tube. Do you know her? The YouTuber?
Yes.
Yeah, so she came out as
Yeah.
trans like a couple years ago, maybe like 3 or something like that. And I remember her video, her coming out video was really crazy because I'd predominantly been hearing the wrong body narrative where it's like trans people feel like they've been born in the wrong body and they've always felt like something was off and like something like that. But she was like, it wasn't really like that for her. She said it was more like the analogy she used was a rock in her shoe, where it was like something was a little uncomfortable, but you just think that everybody has a rock in their shoe. So it's like you don't know that you're trans because it's so hard to figure out in a cis heteronormative society where it's like that's not something that it's like you would think, oh, I feel a little like something's a little uncomfortable, something's a little off. Oh, it's because you're trans, because that's not something like that's very normalized to like consider, or it's only starting to become like a more normal like thought that people have. So I thought that was like really good, where she wasn't like, oh, I always felt like so wrong in my own skin. It took her like a moment to like actually realize that she wanted to be like, she wanted to present as a woman, but it wasn't really like everything. My own body was like so wrong. I can't really like remember exactly what she said, but I just remember like it was more resonant with me. And so I think like just having more depictions of that would be good. And I think what we're seeing right now is like the media industry is like filtering through only a very small, like narrow view of like the trans experience. So even if that's true for some people, it's to the detriment of a lot of other trans people because maybe they could have figured out they were trans a lot sooner or taken steps towards their own happiness if there had been a broader range of representation that they could have seen themselves in.
Yeah, it seems like media industries tend to want to do that a lot, where they want to like curate the experience of like one group to be just like one thing, so it's the most like broadly relatable and like makes the most money, or it's like the most dramatic or whatever. But yeah, no, you're right. Like that's, I mean, it's potentially like detrimental.
Agree. And I feel like that's, yeah, I agree. Something that's an issue for a lot of people. And I think you are also experiencing that with like the sapphic media issue, you know?
But I mean, all in all, I think that it's that the general like increase in transmedia is a good thing, because I remember we used to talk about like the Matrix as like transmedia, and like, you know, when you watch that movie, like it's not obvious that it's an allegory for trans, and there's also that it's just an allegory, even though, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm trying to remember that it was like written by two trans women.
Yes.
To be like an allegory. Yeah.
They actually didn't intend it as an allegory, because that was before, I believe. Okay, I could also be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure it was before they themselves knew they were trans. And so they just ended up writing that story. And then looking back, they're like, it's definitely an allegory for transness, but we didn't know it yet.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. So that's like not great representation.
Yeah, because that's the only thing that was being let through, right? Is like...
Right, yeah.
But yeah, definitely not ideal.
But yeah, no, it's crazy to think that that's like kind of all there was. And then I can think of like, well, actually we don't need to bring up old like bad representation. It's maybe not necessary.
Oh yeah, no, like the very cursed stuff that they cover in Disclosure. If you want to know about the history of bad trans rep in media, I recommend that documentary, because they go into it in detail.
Yeah, that was a good one.
When Men Were Men is another one of those trans films that I would say falls into like a fairly common narrative about transness, but it's done very well, and it's written and acted by two trans people. So if you can find it online, I would recommend that film. There's good stuff out there, but once again, I would like to see some lighthearted stuff, and maybe some like Asian specific stuff as well. There are actually a couple of Asian trans or trans adjacent things out there. I would say the documentary Shinjuku Boys is about like Japanese people who are like hosts at this type of like bar where all of them are AFAB people, but they're all mask presenting. So there's a range of people who might like fall into the category of more like mask sapphic people to like trans mask to like trans men. That's an interesting documentary. And then I would also suggest Coming to You, which is a Korean documentary about a couple like queer people in Korea and their lives and their mothers, actually, and their mothers' journeys towards accepting them. And those are both very good documentaries about like being Asian and like kind of gender nonconforming and or trans. But yeah,
slay.
Any closing thoughts?
Any closing thoughts? Well, thank you for the recs. I hope everyone appreciates and checks them out. Well, I guess you don't. You read a lot. I need to read more books, because I think for a lot of like the representation that I'm looking for or that I want to see in movies and TV, I'm so often disappointed. But there's a lot of it there in novels. There's so much literature to sort through, but it's fine. I always take your recommendations. So
yes, appreciate.
That's my filter.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed the episode, and if you read any of the books, you should let us know in the comments, or watch any of those things that we said.
Let us know on Tumblr.
Yeah, let us know, and we'll see you next week.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye.